Welcome to Outside Voices with me, Mark Bidwell, where I talk to remarkable and compelling leaders from the worlds of business, arts, sports, exploration, and academia. In these conversations, I explore topics of fundamental importance to many of us today, both in work and in life, topics ranging from leadership and performance to creativity and growth. Outside Voices has a very clear purpose: to bring fresh and diverse perspectives that help listeners navigate the world we live in. This is the second of two episodes featuring Vas Narasimhan, who's CEO of Novartis, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Vas is new in the CEO role and is a little over a year into executing an ambitious strategy to reimagine medicine. And in case you haven't listened to the first part of this conversation, I strongly urge you to do so, as it will put this second discussion in context. But by way of recap, in the first episode, we covered topics like innovation, the drug hunter's mindset, and market access. Now, in this episode, we get into AI, which is where the company is making some very big investments, and how AI can reduce as well as accentuate biases. We discuss the importance of cognitive diversity in addressing business challenges, and what leaders can do to fully capitalize on the diversity around them. And finally, we talk about unbossing the organization, what this means, why it's key to the future of the business, and some of the challenges that this brings in a company like Novartis with a really strong track record of success over many, many years. Here's Vas. Can we move to a more prosaic subject, AI? I mean, you're obviously investing a lot of resource in this. One of the things that struck me, I think I heard you saying that the hype's there, right? But I mean, your forecasting, for instance, is improved by AI. And you said the reason being that it doesn't have biases. I'm interested in this area of bias. You know, how big a problem are biases in a company like Novartis, and what are the biggest ones that you find yourself tackling?
Yeah, so the potential for human bias is quite significant, just because of underlying human motivation. So if you take the example of predicting sales, right? I mean, every single individual from our most local brand manager up through the country, region, all have, of course, an incentive to manage expectations or not overcommit or see risk in a certain way, and that all introduces biases into the forecast. And when you have lots of people doing that, that builds up, and then you have a pretty significant bias. What's interesting with AI, particularly in instances where you can create a really clean learning data set. And I think one of the keys with AI, I think as experts know, is AI can introduce biases. It can propagate the biases if you're not careful. Yeah. I think the nice thing in sales is for many of our products, we have 5 years or 10 years of data that's very well cleaned. And in general, post a launch period, product launch period, AI is pretty good at predicting where the sales are going to go based on trends that it's seeing. So that's what we've seen. Another area where I think where we try to do this is in our operations and clinical trials. So a classic challenge we have is a team will come and say, we believe our trial is going to enroll on time. You look at the enrollment curve, hard to judge, right? Because it's a 2-3 year endeavor, very complex, countries all over the world, and you can't tell. So now we've built a system called Sense that looks and predicts for all of our 550 clinical trials in the 50 plus countries we operate, will the trial enroll or not? And so the great conversation then happens with the team coming in, and the algorithm is saying this and the team is saying this, and we can explore where are the differences in opinion and decide, do we need to take action? Because in the end, we tend to be over-optimistic in that case, right? Yeah. So in the case of sales, we tend to be pessimistic. Trials, we tend to be over-optimistic. So these are the kinds of biases I think AI can give us a lot of insight. One area I'm very interested in is in our supply chain. So can we actually use AI to bet in a very complex global supply chain, better predict where really is demand, where do we really need to build up inventories, and get much, much smarter. I mean, we're a company with $5 to $6 billion of inventory that's just in the system. If we got even a little bit more efficient at looking at that, that has a big return, financially for the company. So these are the places where I think AI has a lot of power to take out bias. But there are other places where there's significant limitations as well. So I think you have to look at both sides.
Yeah. Because I mean, you touched on the sort of the R&D heritage of the company going back many, many years, and within that body of knowledge, I guess there's a level of not invented here syndrome. And I'm curious about how do you go after that? How do you overcome that, for instance?
Yeah, I think on multiple dimensions, we're working on AI and research and how it can help us find new molecules. I mean, where there's great traction, I think, for us right now, but we still have to see if it'll pay off, is can we mine large clinical data sets? Because we run a huge number of trials to find either new patient populations, new drug targets, et cetera. Where you have to be humble about this is, again, the training data set is not that strong, right? We don't understand actually that much about how the human body functions. So there's a lot of chance for kind of spurious hypotheses to be generated. But we've seen enough examples where we think that's got a lot of potential. However, I don't think it's going to just suddenly solve drug discovery. I mean, I think many companies are out there perhaps saying that AI can, just eliminate the need and suddenly we'll be finding drug. I don't believe that to be the case because the systems are just so complex. And I mean, there is a bias of not invented here syndrome, I think, in companies, particularly companies that have a long R&D history. I mean, one of the things we have to keep reminding our researchers, and we don't have any magic around this, we just have to keep saying we're agnostic as to whether or not the innovation comes inside or outside. And we have to just find ways to get the next wave of medicines to patients in the areas we work in. Easier said than done. I mean, huge bias. Unfortunately, there is no yet that I know AI algorithm that helps us solve that challenge. In the end, there's a lot of emotions, a lot of cajoling, I guess, to try to get people to be open to external and internal innovation.
So that gets us into the big topic of cultural transformation. And I think there are three words associated with it: being curious, inspired, and unbossed. Can you talk about each of those? And how did you land on those three terms as well? And I should say, I'm an anthropologist. I learned this a long time ago, so I'm really interested in this area.
One of the works that had a huge impact on me was Daniel Pink's Drive in 2009. And what Daniel Pink talks about is, in the end, human beings are, and I believe this just intuitively, are ultimately motivated by purpose, autonomy, and mastery. A sense of purpose that you're part of something bigger and trying to move something bigger as part of this great human project. Autonomy, a sense that you can be self-directed, and mastery, a sense that you can learn and grow in your role. And that in the end, you have to pay people enough to take money off the table, but money will not actually motivate a knowledge organization. So that stuck with me. And as I led different organizations at the company, I tried to put that into practice as best I could, believing that this is the kind of right way forward. So when I became CEO, I had that in the back of my mind, and we as a team sort of asked ourselves, so maybe not those words, but what really, really speaks to us? And so I think inspired by a purpose to reimagine medicine. We want our associates to come to work every day and feel inspired about their work. One of the important nuances there is, and Dan Pink talks about this now, is there's big P purpose and little p purpose. I think it's the big P is reimagine medicine and cure and impact disease. But for most of the 125,000 associates, you also need to connect that down to a little p purpose of if I do my job really well in product safety, that I make our products safer for a child or for a patient. I've learned that you have to connect both to really have the impact. So that's kind of on the purpose dimension. We're very fortunate because we have the purpose in spades, I think, here.
But I mean, making the connection between the individual, the bigger purpose, is a challenge for some, I guess.
It is. And we have to keep trying to link. Obviously, a vast company. If you're in business services and you're working on payroll processing, how do you link back up to the purpose? I think that's, of course, a challenge for every one of our leaders. I think emotionally, everyone immediately gets connected to the idea that we're part of this effort to reimagine medicine. But then making it real every day is something we're working on. When I think about curiosity, that really came from the sense of mastery, the growth mindset, right? I mean, if you think about the work that's been done on how do we create a growth mindset in companies, that was something I felt like was very important. Because if we were gonna be great innovators in every part of the organization, we needed a lot more curiosity about the external world, about what one another are thinking, how can we improve, and less of the feeling that we have all the answers, right? And I think Microsoft has done this well with their switch from the know-it-all culture to the learn-it-all culture. And I think a similar thing is what we need at Novartis, much a bigger focus on curiosity.
How does that look? I mean, what are the things that leaders need to stop doing? Because I mean, the company has, it's been a machine for generating CEOs, right? I mean, there's some amazing CEOs who've come through the company, and it's a performance-driven company as well. And I'm just curious as to how do you bring curiosity into that mix? Because it has worked pretty well to date.
It has. I think we enter an era when there's a lot more complexity and competition. So, I mean, I think having a much more open mind is going to be pretty critical. I mean, the biggest thing is, and I find in this is reprogramming leaders as to what is their role, and that'll get to Unbossed in a second. But if a leader takes the view that the role is to get the best ideas out of the room and not have the answer, but find the answer in the room or in the environment, that's the expectation. And moving that, and I've been in the company since 2005. It used to be you needed to show up and have all the answers. And now we try to encourage teams to really understand, actually, we know that there is often no right answer. We have to navigate in the ambiguities. And also, I think just symbols. I mean, one of the big symbols, we're focusing a lot on learning. I mean, we're basically trying to say, how do we create a learning environment, invest more in learning programs, invest more in massive online learning. We had a big launch of a digital, as we go big on data and digital, a digital platform to just say, we want every single associate to have the opportunity to learn about what is all this data digital, what do these words even mean? And it was incredible to see the response. We had, I think, 30,000 associates show up on the platform to start earning badges on their own time to just get smarter about data and digital. We have, I think, thousands now that are, I forget the name, like have earned the kind of highest levels, the top status on these badges. And they do it on their own. I mean, there's no measurement, there's no tracking. There actually is no reward other than the self-reward of learning and growth. But having seen that now, we want to apply that on a bigger scale. So I think a huge dividend if you actually invest in people's opportunities to be curious. Now, on the third, the kind of autonomy, servant leader, unbossed, it was an interesting story. I had a book left from a dear one of my coaches and facilitators left it on my desk about a week after I was named CEO, and it just said Unbossed. And the book was written by Lars Koland, coordinated by Lars Koland, but it was kind of a crowdsourced book from various leadership thinkers out of around the world. And the book really nicely describes the concept of servant leaders and accountable associates and owners. And how do you create this in a company? So, we've thought about, we could use words like servant leader or empowerment, but everybody kind of rolls their eyes when they hear that. But it was interesting, with using the word unbossed started a massive conversation in this company because it's kind of a strange word. Does that mean we don't need bosses, or what is an unbossed, and what is he even talking about? And it created, I think, you go to any spot in Novartis, they've heard about Unbossed, they're talking about it, they're debating it. And in my mind, just the fact we talk about it and debate how do we lead and how do associates show up at the company was already a huge, huge victory, because it wasn't even a conversation before. Now the hard work begins of how to teach people what do we expect from Unbossed leaders. That's hard. Also, I'm learning as important is teaching our associates to say, suddenly in a world where they used to be waiting to be told what to do, now we're saying, here's the goal, here's the objective, this is what we want to accomplish. I'm here to remove obstacles for you. Good luck. That sometimes leads to paralysis. Actually just leads to, okay, that was not how it worked for the last 20 years. So now, what do I do? And that's having also an important element, as important as how the leaders behave is also how our people really take on this new accountability we're giving them. So it's a journey. We're year one in. I'd say we're on a start, but that's kind of how we got to the 3 words.
Okay. So what does it mean for you as a leader? What changed once you embraced this in terms of what did you stop doing and what did you start doing?
There was such a premium, at least in old leadership theory, that the leader is the one who walks in the room and knows the answer, right? Who gives the direction, tells everybody what to do, gives everybody the marching orders, then leaves the room, right? This was the kind of model of a great leader. And that was built up from the days of Frederick Taylor in the 1920s and 30s up through to today. Now, I think the model of leadership, which frankly is really old, it goes back to the Tao Te Ching 2,500 years ago, and we think about servant leaders, is to actually walk in the room and ask open-ended questions, to actually rely on your people to do the work and say, you are here to remove obstacles, you're going to ask the questions. One of the big things in my role I've realized is you have to have tremendous clarity, though, on direction. Yes. And clarity on where do we want to go and what do we want to accomplish. Because without that, this unbossed servant leadership, it doesn't work. It just creates anarchy, chaos, right? But if you have that clarity of the direction, clarity on your priorities, clarity on where you want to go, you create that framework. It's kind of like, as one of my colleagues put it, you kind of paint the lines on the tennis court, and then you say, let people play, and say, this is the lines of the tennis court, this is what we want to accomplish, but just play now. I'm just going to sit back, and if you need my coaching, I'm here to help, but I'm not going to sit here and try to micromanage and do the work. for you. And that was a learning for me. I think I started that journey about 10 years ago, trying to get in. It's very uncomfortable at first because you feel like you lose control. But actually what I've observed is organizations outperform in those settings. As long as you keep bringing them back to the why and where is the strategic direction we're heading. So that's how I try to run our leadership team at the top, and then it hopefully flows down through the company.
I mean, I think 50% of the company are millennials now. How do you think they're feeling, the new strategy now? I mean, how do you think they're experiencing it?
I think many of them are very excited. I think they like the concept of Unbossed. They like the culture change we're on. I think as important as the culture change, they also like the symbols of us really showing what do we stand for. So things like the access principles I talked about, that shows that we talk about having a purpose and then we're really trying to act on it. Or our commitments to malaria, leprosy, or our commitments to carbon neutrality in the environment, or equal pay with the United Nations, or things like LGBTI, workforce rights. All of these elements sort of create a surround sound of almost proof points. The company is really here to stand for something that matters, because I think that's very important for this next generation of the workforce. That's been incredibly, I think, important. I think one of the things, though, that is also clear is there's impatience about making the change happen. And I have to keep trying to remind everyone that, again, company has been where we're sitting today for, in some form or another, for 250 years. Yeah. It's a long journey. Many leaders in this company have been hugely successful with a very different model of leadership. And it's not like a light switch that you flip and suddenly everybody changes how they lead. So this is a long journey. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge with our younger workforce is they love the direction, they love the symbols, they want it to happen. It can't happen fast enough. And you have to just remind everyone that it's it takes time.
I think you said 5 years, right?
That's the benchmark I've put out there. There's no science to that, though. Sure. It's an arbitrary number.
But bad probably is declaring things too soon as well, right?
Yeah, and that you really have to protect against, I think, because you can feel very good as a leader standing in front of town halls, in front of lots of cheering crowds. But of course, you're having the subsect of people in a huge organization who are bought in, yes, right? Yeah. There's a group of people who are probably still not showing up, sitting at their desks saying this is all crazy nonsense, or I don't agree, or this isn't actually changing anything for me. And, I think you're always going to have that in a huge company like this. But hopefully we get to the point where 70, 80% really believe it's a very different environment.
Yeah, I mean, these are echo chambers and you have to be cautious of them. Let's just begin to wrap with diversity, because, I mean, this touches it on the curiosity piece. I noticed you recently brought someone in from the outside into procurement from a low margin industry to help you look at your cost base and driving the margin expansion. I found that kind of interesting because it's, the industry in the past has, I guess, recruited people in from within or from within the industry. How do you think about the topic of diversity? Because I'm putting it in I have a definition around cognitive diversity versus, gender diversity. I'm just interested in how you think about diversity.
So I agree. I think the most important diversity we need to have is diversity of mindset and diversity of experience, and of the ability to look at problems in different ways. I think in some ways, gender diversity, LGBTI diversity are all markers of a place that's open to diverse ideas and creates an environment where anyone can succeed. And so they're important in that sense. But ultimately, what we want as an innovation-driven company is a diversity of experience. And I actually place a huge premium on people who can come from other places and apply laterally knowledge they've developed someplace else in here. I mean, if you think about our head of Novartis Business Services comes from Syngenta, I think a much lower margin business than ours. Our head of procurement comes from Adidas, and again, a different mindset. Our head of ethics, risk, and compliance comes from Siemens. And so we're trying to get our chief digital officer comes from consumer, and also earlier than that, Amazon. And so you try to bring in these individuals to really challenge our thinking. And I think it's quite remarkable to see, at least for me as the leader, when I see how they look at something that we've looked at for a decade, and we have a kind of group think around it, and then they come in and say, what are you guys thinking, right? There's actually a whole other way to look at this problem. It shows you the power of actually having that diversity of minds. One of the most important things, though, I think comes back to leadership. The diversity in perspectives and diversity in all dimensions only matters if the leader leverages that diversity, has an openness to ask the questions, and runs a team in a way, again, servant leader, unbossed, to actually get the best ideas out of the room. If you flip back into the, let's call it the old style Novartis leadership, where the leader just shows up and says, I have the answers, you could frankly have robots in the room. I mean, it's just following orders. And so that's very important to, I think, leverage diversity.
Well, and within that, I guess, I mean, you touched on learning. I mean, there are two barriers to learning. One is ego. You touched on humility, and the other is fear. And I guess, the diversity model that you outlined only really works or is powered up by creating a safe environment for people to ask questions that might appear to be ignorant and potentially make mistakes as well.
Yeah. We've done a lot of discussions here internally on psychological safety, to use kind of Amy Edmondson's terminology, and keep creating these safe environments. I love these leadership thinkers. I mean, Simon Sinek would say that the leader's role is to make people feel safe, and that's when people run through walls for the leader, regardless of the setting. We have a long way to go in that dimension. I think there's still a perception, rightful, fair enough, that there's a lot of judgment inside the company, and that if you challenge or ask a question or admit vulnerability or not knowing the answer, that there would be a judgment passed, as opposed to feeling safe to say that's an opportunity to grow and learn. Something we're working on. I think it will take time. We have to go step by step. So we work on our top 300 leaders in a much more deep way on self-awareness on these topics. Then we're going to get to the top 1,000, the top 2,000. And I hope over time it builds a momentum. But I think to have leverage diversity, you do need the safety to have open discussions.
Yeah, I mean, the anthropologist in me thinks about, observation without judgment. Are you able to observe something without jumping in to judge or to answer the question? You've got to create that space, which it sounds like, is at the heart of the cultural transformation piece.
I think so. I think there's the observe without judge. There's the task conflict versus personal conflict, which is so important. I mean, I think far too often task conflict turns into a personal conflict in our settings. And I think separating those two out. Also, I think there's just a fundamental compassion and empathy that you need to have towards other people in your teams and your organizations. That everyone here shows up coming to work, trying to help, trying to do a good job. We have an organization filled with knowledge workers. I think 99.9% of the people at this company show up every day trying to do a good job and trying to help. And if you have that as your mindset, as opposed to a more negative mindset on human behavior, you come to different conclusions, I think.
Yeah, it's growth versus fixed mindset. So just beginning to wrap up now, Vas, what have you changed your mind about recently?
Yeah, I changed my mind on lots of things, I guess, on an ongoing basis. I mean, I think one thing that comes to mind in this experience of CEO over the last year, even more so than perhaps I had in the past, is the importance of appealing to hearts over minds. I think you need to do both, but there's a lot written about this concept of logos versus mythos. I would have not believed how much you can inspire and motivate a huge organization by appealing to hearts, appealing to top things, words like magic, words like mystery, words like miracles, right? And I've learned, I think, over the course of this year that appealing to hearts through language that really evokes mythos actually has a bigger impact than all of the number charts that you can possibly show.
Interesting. Okay. Second question, where do you go to get fresh perspectives to help you solve problems and make decisions?
I'm a heavy reader of periodicals that have nothing to do with Novartis. I'm kind of a diehard reader of The Economist, National Geographic. I read, try to read Nature and Science, and always trying to look for where I could learn something. Harvard Business Review, MIT Business Review. And so I'm always trying to look from those periodicals to look for perspectives that are different than mine. I'd honestly say the other place is interestingly Nature. I mean, I find that disconnecting from the problems and just spending time either in nature with rivers or running or walking has the ability to open up the mind to make lateral connections that you wouldn't otherwise make. So maybe it's a combination of both of those things that helps.
That's a common answer. I mean, from previous guests who've answered that, is just getting out and just changing their environment and being open to it, just pausing and stuff comes at you. Third question, what's been your most significant failure or low? What have you learned from it and how have you applied that learning?
Yeah, I think in my mind still was, we worked on building a vaccines company. I stayed with it the entire time it was at Novartis, from acquisition to ultimately selling it to GSK. And so personally at that moment in time, I felt like it was a failure that we weren't able to make this into such a successful business that Novartis wanted to keep it. So I remember that moment feeling like, this was in some ways a a failure, because it was a large effort, and I had many leadership roles in that business. I would say what I take from that and learn from that, though, is one, interestingly, those vaccines do extremely well in GSK's hands. And so sometimes you're not the right owner, and you have to have the humility to realize when you're not the people with the right position. But if you do the right things, ultimately, good things will happen. And I think the other lesson I learned from that was actually a moment in time after that where I had no idea where my career would go. Mm-hmm. And if you had asked me 4 years from that moment in time, would I be CEO of Novartis 4 years ago, I would have said, there's no way. That would not even, anyone who would have said that to me, I would have said that is completely crazy. And so I also sort of take a lesson in again, serendipity and how careers and life work. If you keep trying to go to places where you're going to learn, grow, and have an impact, things somehow show up.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much, Vas. This was exactly what I had in mind. Hope you've enjoyed the conversation.
It was great.
As much as I have.
Very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
This podcast is produced by Outside Lens, a business that brings you fresh and diverse perspectives that help you navigate the world we live in. For more information, go to www.outsidelens.com, where you can find details on this and many more podcasts that I've done with remarkable leaders over the years. If you found this episode particularly valuable, please share it on social media. I hope you enjoy my work, and feel free to let me know what you think, either contacting me on LinkedIn or emailing me at mark@outsidelens.com.